Welcome back, everyone, to Righteous Minds. You know, Righteous Minds, where we are tending the mind and nurturing the soul. We are back with a part two of
Mhm.
Healthy Boundaries, which is part of our self care series. Today, we're excited because Melissa's going to walk us through the six boundaries types. It's emotional, it's intellectual, and the order I may give may not be the order in which we discuss it, but it's emotional, intellectual, material, time, sex, and physical. So those are six different areas that we're going to go over. So we're pretty excited to get right in. Melissa's going to get bring us up to speed again on what understanding boundaries, the importance of boundaries. Last time we were together, we talked about boundaries, but a couple areas that we kind of spoke to, we definitely tried to dig into or delve into the understanding of what the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation, because boundaries oftentimes when we're trying to maintain or establish or reestablish a boundary, sometimes, especially in different communities, we tend to want to focus on people reconciling.
Mhm.
Um, in addition to forgiveness, although we definitely determine that forgiveness is important, you must forgive. Reconciliation can be the goal. So that was some of the pressing points that we kind of discussed last time. So I'm
Mhm.
really, really excited for us to dig down and dig deep into other boundaries that we should have and determine whether or not they're healthy, they're unhealthy, how we can do better. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Melissa, who is going to take us down the path of different boundaries. Melissa?
Awesome, awesome. Thank you. So I'm excited again to get into part two of this. So let me just remind everybody of kind of how we defined boundaries or what we talked about. We kept using the word safe. And it was really just making sure that however we are in relationships or in our relationships, they should be safe. And boundaries are these expectations that we show up with of how or what is acceptable for us in the relationship. I also like to kind of think about it as not just feeling safe, but also knowing what would be considered unsafe. So anytime you are in a relationship and there is a power differential, and your needs are not valued or they come in conflict with another person's needs, then there is clearly either some abuse or just basically a need for healthy boundaries. So, most of the time, when I'm thinking about healthy boundaries, I'm thinking about both people showing up in the relationship. Or however many people are showing up in the relationship, and everyone's needs being equally valued and equally able to be achieved, so to speak, where there is no conflict of people's needs, that all needs are considered valuable and equally valuable. Okay.
Isn't that where you mentioned reciprocity last time?
Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. And the definition of that, I love that word. And when I looked it up, it really just resonated with me. But it basically means that there is an exchanging that happens in the relationship. You could say exchanging of goods or whatever, but there's an exchange that's happening in the relationship that is mutually beneficial to everyone.
Mhm.
So I love to talk about reciprocity. Most of the time, I talk about it with couples, but
Mhm.
I also like to talk about it for myself, for single people, for anybody. So thank you for bringing that up.
Mhm.
So I want to get into it. So we talked about, so I think our first thing is physical boundaries. And physical boundaries, pretty self-explanatory. It really has a lot to do with where you stand as far as personal space and proximity, where you stand with regards to respect, closeness, physical touch. This could be giving people hugs and handshakes. Obviously, in most instances, the closer that we are to people, or the more intimate the relationship, the more comfortable we are with physical touch. So you're probably not going to maybe give someone a hug that you just met. but someone that you're close to in your family, you most likely will be a lot more physical with. And so, oftentimes, if this boundary is violated, it usually is going to be around that someone touching you, and you don't want them to touch you, or someone standing too close to you. I think we may have all experienced someone getting too close to us and kind of getting in our personal space. And then what we often do is we kind of start to back up. That's just kind of an instinct. And so we're most likely communicating to that person that we don't feel comfortable enough with them being that close to us. One of the ways that I remember when I work with children in therapy that we would teach children boundaries is you use a hula hoop and you talk to them about that hula hoop. What's inside of that hula hoop is their personal space.
That's good.
And so, specifically for children who have been sexually abused and violated in that way, that gives them something observable,
Mhm,
something that they can see that
mhm.
shows them, okay, so if you want people to be inside the hula hoop, who are those people that can be inside of the hula hoop, and who are those people that should be outside of that hula hoop when it comes to boundaries? So that's a great way to help kids understand that.
That is really
Um,
good.
yeah, yeah. I thought it was fun, and it's a good way to show them that.
Mhm.
The other type of boundary is
Can I have a question?
emotional.
Can I
Yes,
have a
ma'am.
question?
Yes,
Okay,
ma'am.
so physical boundary. When I was looking over it and, preparing to hear you give us our information, the first thing I thought about was one of our discussions that we had the one, I think it wasn't on Righteous Mind, but you and I had a discussion, and it was over the story of that,
What was her name?
Risa Tisa.
Teresa Tisa, yeah.
Who the blank did I marry?
Mhm,
And I remember one of the first things you mentioned was that once they walked into she indicated that they had walked into the
mhm,
restaurant, that they held hands. And it
mhm.
was interesting when you said that they already was, what did you
He was already, I'm trying to think of the best word, but he was already seeing what her boundaries were, or I guess you could say testing her boundaries.
Mhm,
Because obviously they had never met each other before. And this was their first time. That's how I understood it. This was their first time
mhm,
meeting.
mhm, mhm,
And he reached for her hand, and then she pretty much just let him hold her hand. Now that to me would not be that would be a boundary violation in my opinion. But
mhm,
I believe that he was also testing that to see
mhm,
what her boundaries were, because they didn't have a conversation about the boundaries. It wasn't
mhm,
something that was clearly stated, but people can engage in behaviors with you that are communicating to them based off of your response what your boundaries are. And so
mhm,
she was clearly communicating to him that personal space or physical boundaries were pretty loose for her, or what I would say, not even loose, it would be more like porous.
mhm.
And we talked about that in the
More
last episode, where
more
there's porous
mm,
boundaries, rigid boundaries, and then there's healthy boundaries.
mhm,
So he was able to see that, her boundary at that stage in their relationship was porous, because
mhm.
it was pretty much like, yeah, I'm getting physical with somebody that I just met.
That's true, and you know what's so interesting is the fact that, she even said she mentioned it, and she said but she went with it because she felt that he was nice and so forth
Hmm.
and so on, and the reason why I bring that up is because I thought of myself, like, have I ever done that? I can't say that I've done that immediately, but
Hmm.
definitely when you pointed it out, it really made me have a aha moment, like, that is true."
Hmm.
Because we don't really know each other like that. I don't even know if you have, like, clammy, slimy hands.
Or where your hands have been.
Listen, that part. COVID out in these streets. No,
Right.
seriously. So, I definitely wanted to, kinda surface that up that,
Yeah.
that ultimately boundaries can be simple as that, but ultimately, you're right, I think he was testing her boundaries, and we discovered that he blew through all her boundaries, um,
Correct.
hence the um, multi-series on TikTok.
The 75 episodes.
Listen, okay, I'm sorry. Okay, next
No, I
time.
think you bring up a good point. I think you bring up a good point, because I think ultimately, when we are starting out in relationships, whether they're romantic or not, people are seeing where we are when it comes to boundaries, and we're seeing where they are when it comes to boundaries. And it's those early interactions that determine the later interactions, right?
Mhm.
As we saw with her. So I think you brought up a very good point, for sure.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am. So the second type of boundary is emotional boundaries, and this has to do with feelings, how emotional needs are met within the relationship. So, of course, our emotional needs are going to be safety, autonomy, attention, connection, everything around how we are emotional with other people and how other people are emotional with us.
Mhm.
And so we talked about, I think was the last episode, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So, again, everything builds off of being safe, being physically safe, and feeling security. So, are you able to express yourself in the relationship safely,
Mhm.
without there being any retaliation? Without there being criticism or judgment? Are you safe to feel sad? Are you safe to be able to express that, you're dealing with something very difficult and very painful, and know that that person is going to be able to validate that? Boundary violations when it comes to our emotional boundaries would be what I just said: someone being very invalidating.
Mhm.
It never feels good for anyone to share something very painful or that brings up a lot of emotion for them. And for someone to then say, you just need to suck it up, or you just need to get it together, or stop being
Mhm.
so sensitive, and things like that. Most of us want someone to at least validate that we're having
Okay.
that experience, even if it may not be how you would respond, or that might not be your emotional reaction to that particular thing. We still want people to kind of, just validate us and let us know that they understand why we would feel that way.
Now I feel guilty. I mean, because I feel like I'm generally, um, like I have a heart and, when
Mm-hmm.
someone's expressing emotion, but it made me feel guilty now because I'm thinking about a few times where, for whatever reason, something was upsetting to my daughter that was like, okay, her necklace broke. And it was to the point of her getting emotional.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess maybe part of it is because I'm like, can we fix it? Um, and crying, we can't fix it crying.
Mm-hmm.
So how can we
Mm-hmm.
fix it? So maybe I need to work on that because it's not that I don't care, I don't want her
Mm-hmm.
to cry, but I'm saying
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, so how can we resolve it? How can we get you to a better place? And maybe
Mm-hmm.
that's not being mindful of that,
And
because Mhm.
go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Finish what you're saying. I
No,
don't want
maybe
to cut
that's
you off.
not maybe she doesn't perceive it as me being mindful of that I'm not, taking her feelings or validating her feelings, but I feel like if I will be there a while, and we won't move from that point because we have somewhere to go.
Right, right. Yeah. So there's a lot of things coming up. There's a lot of boundaries coming up for you. So there's time, there's intellectual, right? We're always operating in these boundaries.
That's good.
And in so many instances, because we're relating to other people,
Mhm.
they're in their boundaries, and we're in, how we say we're in our feelings. Well, we in
Mhm.
our
Oh,
boundaries,
okay.
and
I'm
that's
used
the
to now.
reality of it. And so when we're interacting, as I said earlier, are our needs clashing?
Mm.
And most of the time, that's what creates boundary violations, is when you have a need and I have a need and they're both not the same. And how do I kind of show up to meet your need, but also know that my need is going to get met? And so it gets real tricky, and it gets uncomfortable many times, and
Mm.
different people operate differently. So maybe for you, you go into intellectual boundaries of problem solving. You're problem solving, and she's just in the emotional boundary of wanting to be validated and needing that like support or reassurance that it's okay that you're having this moment, but then you're just kind of like, well, we got to get this fixed and let's move on. You see what I'm saying? So sometimes it's just where we are in our boundaries versus where other people are in their boundaries, and
Mm.
making sure that we find ways to still respect other people in their boundaries, knowing
Mhm.
that they're going to respect us in ours. And that can be very challenging. That can be very challenging.
I just got
So
that, y'all. I'm gonna work on that.
I think
To
we
me,
all,
it's about it's about at the end of the day, what did I say? We're gonna be transparent, honest, and authentic. And I mean, with you saying that, it just really we literally just had that episode a couple days ago. And I've seen it a couple times, and my
hmm
response is kind of the same. Like,
hmm
okay, I'm sad that you are feeling this way. Okay,
hmm
so you can feel this way. How can we move while you're feeling this way? What can I do
right,
to resolve it? What can I do? Because in my
right,
mind, the whole time, even though she's crying, I'm like, right now, I know we cannot fix this. We can't. We don't have the
hmm
resources to fix it. And in my mind, I'm thinking like, okay, either A, we'll be able to once we'll leave it here. We'll be able to go. I can take her
yeah,
somewhere, or if I have to get another one, if that makes sense. But I hear what you're saying. What you're saying is that, but at the end of the day, in her space where she is,
hmm
I have to be able to figure out a way to still validate uh, her emotional response to um, that. And I think part of that probably has to do with, she has to pivot, and that's probably the
right,
boundary that's bothering her is affecting
right.
another one of her boundaries. But go ahead, I'm sorry.
Exactly. No, no, I think no, this is a real life example. I think it's a good example. Because then, what do you do when there's a conflict, right? You have to state what the need is, and also state like how can we move forward? So like you said, let's address this later, because you've got a time boundary of, oh, I need to be someplace. We need to get you someplace, or whatever the case might be. So let's come back to this, and sometimes that's validation alone, because you're communicating to that person that you may not have the time right now to address where they are, but you definitely value it, and you're going to make time to address it at a later time. So sometimes it's just as simple of us communicating that, we want to come back to this. This is important to me. I do want to make sure, because it's important to you. I want you to know it's important to me, and
Mhm.
we'll come back to it when we have more time to invest in
I will definitely work on that.
it. Let's move on. No, just kidding. No, no fights, no physical altercations on Righteous Minds. I'm just messing. I'm just messing. It's all love. It's all love here.
Amen.
But that comes up with me sometimes as a therapist, because a lot of times you're faced with clients who are resistant.
Mhm.
And, we throw that term around to mean that, oh, they just don't want to make progress and they don't want to be invested and all of that. But we can fail to recognize that some of the things that they're dealing with from a mental health standpoint make it really, really hard for them to
Mm.
even feel like doing anything different. You see what I'm saying? And if I'm
Mhm.
coming with my boundary of, we need to be making progress, and what would I say, it would be more like a the emotional boundary of me seeing them move towards the things that I'm trying to move them towards, but they really just can't find the uh the physical strength, right? So
Mhm.
their physical boundary, they just may be tapped out, and I can
Mm.
see that as resistance and become
Mhm.
very critical and very harsh and all of those types of things, and maybe even invalidating, not
Mhm.
recognizing that they may have some other things going on that make it very difficult for them, and it's not necessarily them just being resistant,
Okay.
but it can conflict when
Mhm.
when I'm in therapy with people. So anyway, we can definitely tap into that a little bit more, but those would be your emotional boundaries, and then we have the intellectual boundaries I mentioned earlier: problem solving, you being able to express thoughts and opinions, self expression, and just having ideas and creativity. So anything that you would think is an intellectual skill, something that has to do with you gaining knowledge and learning and those types of things.
Mhm.
When we show up in relationships, we want people to support that. We want people to support our creative endeavors.
Yeah.
We want people to support our self expression. And they're not always going to be the same. And so, any type of dismissive behavior or again, criticizing how someone expresses themselves or someone's creativity, that would be considered a violation of
Mhm.
that boundary. And certainly people can do that, in abusive type of situations, but even in situations where people are maybe they're more interested in what they're doing being highlighted, and they're not always so supportive of what other people are doing. And so then they may find ways to undermine it or be negative about it or say that it has no significance or value. I've talked to a lot of people who, are very artistic, and they don't want to do any type of conventional work. They just want to go and do art, but they get criticized by people in their family who's like, well, how are you going to live off that? And is anybody going to buy that stuff? Where you go, and so it can be a lot of dismissing of people's
Mhm.
creativity in that
True.
sense.
That's true.
And then you mentioned sexual boundaries, which again seems pretty self-explanatory, but it's the conversations that we have around sexual matters. What is okay and acceptable in terms of sexual behavior for people that are in those intimate relationships. But even people that are in situationships and things like that, they need to have these conversations as well. And
Situationships, Lord.
for some couples, it could be what do we do with explicit content and explicit types of things, because you may be somebody that was used to watching pornography or watching very sexually explicit things, and now you're with someone who, let's say, they hold some very deeply held religious values around those types of things. That's going to create a lot of conflict. If that person is going, you know what, I don't do pornography and sexually explicit things, but this person is used to that. And the conversations that have to happen around that, and what that one person may feel is appropriate versus what the other person may feel is appropriate and acceptable. And then obviously any violations that involve coercion and pressure, and basically what I would say, forced uh, forced behavior and things like that would be a violation. So
Mhm.
certainly people should be able to show up in a sexual context and not feel like they have to do things that they don't want to do, or be touched in ways that they don't want to be touched.
Okay, sexual boundaries. Okay.
Uh,
Can I share something real quick?
yes,
I
ma'am.
um Kirk Franklin, I came across this, I think it might have been Instagram or TikTok anyway, where he was speaking, and I won't say it was just for men. I'm pretty sure it's for everyone. But the example he gave, and it, of course, had to do with sexual boundaries. Um, he not specific to, but ultimately it's about. And
Mm-hmm.
he was saying that what happens if if a man engages with a female, it could have been his first person, and he's sexually active with that person. And then there's another female who is the type that is willing to do everything. He deals with that person. And
Mm-hmm.
then he deals with someone else, who, let's just say, I think he was basically saying, like, they'll do certain things, they'll cook, whatever. But
Mm-hmm.
then once he gets ready to get with the person who he wants to marry, he says literally she has all the weight of all these women he's been with, the pressures of
Mm-hmm.
his experiences, um, having to carry that, because
Mm-hmm.
ultimately we can't get rid of what's in our head
Right.
or our experiences.
Our
And I
experience.
thought it
Mm-hmm.
was just really it was really a good analogy about how, when we think about sexual boundaries, I mean, one thing for certain, we can say we don't have it. We can say God got it wrong, because this is a new day. But I promise he got it right, because
Mhm.
because due to the fact that we haven't followed what the Bible standard is, that's why it's just so much dysfunction in
Mhm.
relationships, and especially
Mhm.
when we are starting relationships and that boundary,
Yeah.
whether we decide together in the confines of what from a biblical standpoint, we've actually broke the boundary God has set for it. But we ultimately do end up suffering some consequences
Mhm.
um by breaking that boundary.
Mhm.
And again, I don't care if it's that you guys both agreed to it.
Mhm.
Um and especially if we consider ourselves believers, which it seems that is a common occurrence in the
Yeah.
body. Um,
Mhm.
but I thought his story, his analogy was just really powerful. And I think that if probably we went into situations like thinking about that, like, wow, do I want to put this type of pressure on the person that I say I want to spend the rest of my life with? We might reconsider some decisions we make.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've had conversations with people who, you know, females in particular who were, taking on wife behaviors, right? In in a relationship that was not a marriage.
Mhm.
And again, um, we don't cross boundaries or violate boundaries or have boundary issues by accident. They happen as a result of our experiences, to go back to what you said. So depending on what you have been exposed to, depending on what you have witnessed in terms of relationships. I mean, I know I witnessed a lot of people violating physical boundaries,
Mhm.
so putting their hands on each other and things like that. And so there was a point in my own life where I was like, I'm just going to slap some people, and I'm just going to, you know what I'm saying? Because that was the example that, when you are upset, you violate people's physical boundaries by exercising physical force to
Mm.
get what you want. And so we all have to come to terms with the reality of what we have experienced and what we have witnessed
Mhm.
that has shaped how we view boundaries and how we show up in relationships. And we could talk about romantic relationships, but ultimately any kind of relationship. How are
Mhm.
you showing up in these relationships? And if you're
Mhm.
showing up being like a wife, even though you don't have the ring, that probably in some way, shape, or form has been modeled to you,
Mhm.
and you have some experience with that where it was communicated to you that this was the way that you show up in relationships. And
Mhm.
so we all have to take accountability for that.
Yes.
But I definitely think that the sexual boundaries definitely get crossed or violated quite frequently.
Mhm.
And it's very, very unfortunate, especially when you bring up religious communities and people who operate in a faith based position. But I also feel that there is a lot of um, challenges for the church to talk about this type of stuff.
Mhm.
It gets real uncomfortable. But there's a lot of uncomfortable things that happen in relationships where sexual boundaries are violated, that are just underreported, that people don't know is happening,
Mhm.
and people are in unsafe situations. And so when we begin to talk about safety, this is why we're having this conversation. When you bring that word safety back into it, it
Mhm.
really changes how you see this stuff. When you
Amen.
really think about the safety part of it, that a lot of this stuff creates a very unsafe situation for people. And so that being said, is to me more of a reason why it needs to be talked about,
Amen.
especially in church communities.
Amen.
So that's what I have to say about that. Um, any so then we have material boundaries. Let
Mhm.
me move forward. Let me get off that topic. Not just kidding. Uh, material boundaries obviously have to do with finances and material things, money, possessions, those types of things. And so most of us would think, well, you wouldn't be sharing money and material things with anybody until you were in a committed relationship. Well, we know that doesn't happen.
Mhm.
We know that I know people that have given somebody that they were dating a car to drive. And
Why are you
they,
talking about me
and,
like that? I don't appreciate
and,
it. Somebody used to drive my
uh-oh,
car. Stop.
uh-oh.
Listen. I stopped it, but I don't appreciate being talked about. I'm like, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I mean to talk. I'm gonna try not to. I'm gonna try not to talk about you. But just recently, me having an encounter with someone that was devastated to find out that this person was cheating on her, but she had allowed them to drive her car. So it's amazing how quickly and how easily people can get into relationships and start doing things that are not safe,
Mhm.
or they can be in a relationship with someone that has them doing things that are not safe. So any type of uh, damaging what belongs to another person or taking something that belongs to another person, that would be a pretty significant violation. But basically, it's kind of that, like, do you take out a credit card and have that person be another user on the account? Do y'all have a joint account? And these are things that come up with married couples. I've
Mhm.
talked to a lot of married couples where they're just kind of like, yeah, we just have our own separate account, or they will have a joint account. And then it's like, okay, well, how is money used? I was talking to one person that was basically taking all of her partner's money and using it. And then he later finds out that they're getting evicted.
Oh,
So it's, again, it's like, where do at what point in the relationship do we do this?
let
These
me
are
ask a question.
conversations that have to happen.
Let me ask a question. I'm sorry. So, in hearing what you're saying about the boundaries, and even hearing you talk about it's about that about us being safe in relationships, and it makes me think. Even though you talk about me because I've let people drive my car who I was
I'm not
dating.
talking about
I-
you,
I'm
Regina.
only joking.
Get off of that.
But
No.
listen, but for real, I mean, I did stop, but
Hmm.
I'm wondering as I think back over some of the decisions that I've made and thinking about some of the boundaries
Hmm.
I myself allowed to be crossed. A part of me feel like I was doing it in the efforts of trying to be safe in a relationship. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Like
it
safe
makes
and
sense.
secure in that relationship by doing these things.
Hmm. Hmm.
Because I mean, you understand what I'm saying?
I do.
So like material things. So, I'm thinking in my mind, I'm thinking like, well, they don't have a car and they can just it's okay. They can just use my car. You give me now listen,
I
that will
do.
not ever, never, ever happen again. But
Hmm.
I'm just saying when I'm thinking about some of my decisions that I've
Hmm.
made, I feel like part of them may have been me in the pursuit of having this relationship be safe
Hmm.
by these
Yeah.
efforts, if that makes sense.
You're bringing up a very good point, because that is what any type of behavior is designed to do,
Mm,
right?
mhm,
Even if it's what I'm going to use the word dysfunctional,
yes,
because let's not forget that we are wired for connection, right?
mhm,
So everything we're doing from the moment that we're born is trying to have a connection with another person.
mhm,
And I recently did a training, and the person was talking about, we have these mirror neurons. And basically, what he was explaining that to mean is that when you are encountering people, and they don't even have to be people that they can
mhm,
just be people that you see when you go to the store or when you walk out the house and you go someplace and you see another person, that when we make eye contact with other people, we begin to mirror them and they begin to mirror us. And that is all designed to increase and enhance connection, right? So if we weren't wired for connection, we wouldn't even be having these conversations. All of us would be out here setting boundaries and doing everything. You see what I'm saying? And just
Mm.
being as safe as we knew how. But the connection piece weighs heavy on us because we have this thing called abandonment and rejection. And
Mm.
most of us don't want to feel that because it doesn't feel good to feel any type of abandonment or any type of rejection. So, if we take this to what our brains are trying to do, our brains are trying to always make sure that we're safe. So, even when you're engaging in unhealthy behaviors, it is for the purpose of being safe. And we
Wow.
have to understand that, because if we don't
Mhm.
understand that, then we beat ourselves in the ground, and we feel bad about ourselves and the decisions that we make. But a lot of times the decisions that we're making is for the sole purpose of being safe. So if your brain is picking up that this is an unsafe situation, to go back to your example, it would be unsafe for you not to loan this person your car because it could mean XYZ. Then if your brain is perceiving that as a threat, your brain is going to go, uh-oh, we've got to do something different.
Wow.
And that might mean let this person use your car. And so a lot of times when I talk to people about boundaries, I help them understand that, because we can all beat ourselves up and feel guilty and go, well, I just made terrible choices
Mhm.
and I didn't see that man coming from a mile away. And all of the things that we say because
Mhm.
we feel terrible about the things that we've allowed. But
Mhm.
you have to see it. You have to see it on the other side, which is your brain was trying to help you to be safe.
Mhm.
This is what children will do. If children are living with a caregiver that is abusive, the child will do everything that they can to keep that parent from being abusive. If that means that I do everything that you want me to do, I be quiet, I go sit in the corner, I don't bother you, that's what that child is going to do, because they've learned that if I behave like this, then this is what they do, right? So a
Mm.
lot of it is our figuring out how to control situations, or how to manage situations that could potentially become unsafe,
Wow.
and what that's going to mean for us. So that wiring is so powerful.
Thank you. Thank
So I
you.
don't want, I never want people to feel that this is easy stuff, because it's not. Setting healthy boundaries, knowing what your expectations are in a relationship and everything, that's not always easy, because you have to go back to the origins of
Mhm.
some of your early relationships. And if a
Mhm.
lot of your early relationships involved a lot of boundary violations and things like that, then it makes sense that it's easier for you to give somebody your credit card, or to um, not be able to say no. That makes perfect sense if some of your earlier experiences were like that, and that's how you were socialized.
Wow. This is good. This is real good.
So now we have time boundaries, which is the last one. And this is how you relate to your own and other people's time. How does time get handled? There are people. I personally am an introvert, so I like to have a good amount of time by myself. And
Mhm.
when I spend too much time with people, I start to go crazy, and I'm like, ooh, I need to get back to, because I find myself getting renewed and getting strengthened from having time away and being by myself and things like that. So there are moments where it can be very difficult for me to, like we talked about a while back, say no about things
Mm.
that people are asking me to do.
Mhm.
And it may be something fun. It may be something that is going to put a little more change in my pocket or whatever. But I
Mhm.
have to go, you know what? I really need time for myself.
Mm.
And I have to recognize that and just go ahead and say no, even though sometimes it can be very difficult. So, how do you spend time, and how do you use time? How do you steward time? All of those types of things come into play when it comes to time boundaries. And so, if you are, let's say, in a relationship with someone that's very clingy, or that
Mm.
has an anxious attachment style, they're going to be very demanding of your time. And that's going to
Mhm.
feel like a violation, because for them, they need to know that you're there and you're
Mhm.
not getting ready to leave them just because you're distant, because in their world, distance means that they're being rejected.
Mm.
And so that can be real challenging when people are demanding of your time.
This is real good. This is real good. So I have some more questions about these boundaries. Okay, so the intellectual boundary. Can
Mhm.
you like give an example of a healthy intellectual boundary and an unhealthy intellectual boundary?
Mm. So I think a healthy intellectual boundary. Let's say that you are in a situation where, and I recently had this come up. You're in a situation where you have a certain way that you like to do things. Like let's
Mhm.
say that you have a certain way that you like to do your laundry. I'm gonna keep it simple. And for you it's about sorting and putting them where they need to go and that type of stuff, getting things in order and everything. And then someone else comes along, and in their mind there's a better way for you to do it. And it's not just a better way for you to do it, but it's the only way for you to do it. and so now and so now this conflict has come up between you and this person, because they're wanting to tell you that this is the only way that you should be able to do laundry. You know what I'm saying? And you have your own way of doing it that
Mhm.
fits with who you are and that seems to work for you. And so now there's this conflict. And I keep going back to conflict because conflict in and of itself is not a bad thing.
Mhm.
I'm meaning more or less when one person's way overrides another person's way. Because if we go
Mhm.
back to reciprocity, reciprocity is all about things being mutual,
Mhm.
mutual, right? So in situations where boundaries are being violated, whether it's intellectual or sexual or whatever, one person's needs are overriding another person's needs. So you
Mm.
could say to that person, I just really need time to myself, and they're going to disregard it. You could say to that person, I really like to do laundry like this, and they're going to disregard that. You could say, this is what makes me feel sexy, and they're going to disregard that. This is what I this is how I like to express my emotions, and they're going to disregard that. And so we have to really pay attention to situations that come up where, because your body and your mind is going to tell you that something doesn't feel right when your boundaries are being violated,
Mm.
because it all comes down to needs.
Mhm.
And you remember the last episode we talked about everybody has needs, and
Right.
everybody's needs are valid. And it doesn't matter if you agree with those needs or if you like those needs, every person's needs to that person is valid. And so if you're coming in and you're being dismissive and you're being invalidating and you are being judgmental and critical of another person's need, then you are essentially communicating to them that their needs don't matter, but
Mhm.
yours matter more.
Wow. Hmm.
So I hope that example helps.
No, it did, it did, it did. I'm just like I mean, I can see so and I just wanna make sure I'm processing. Basically, intellectual boundaries about your ideas, how you think, so forth and so on, and
Yes.
that sometimes okay, I can have another idea, but
Hmm.
what impacts your boundary is when I say your idea is not good.
Hmm.
Right?
Hmm.
Not that
Yeah.
I have a good idea too, you wanna try it, but
Right.
I have a good idea too, your idea doesn't work, only use my idea. That's
Yeah.
where got it.
Yeah. That's where
That
the
happens a lot.
conflict comes in, because I
Mhm,
mean when you think about conflict, that's really what it is.
mhm,
And what you're trying to help people do, like if you're working with couples, is you're trying to help them to understand the difference between control and influence.
mm,
Okay, so you can't control another person, you can
right,
influence them though. There's a lot of people that I have in my life that have influenced me. They have
mhm,
said things, they have done things that I have been inspired by. And I've
mm,
looked at that and go, oh my gosh, I think I want to be that person. Like I know
mhm,
people who love to read. I don't really like to read, but when they talk about the books that they've read, and then I tell them, I really don't like to read, and they'll say to me, "Well, Melissa, you just got to find something that you like," and they start trying to influence me to
Mhm.
feel better about reading, because I let them know it's really hard for me and my
Mhm.
comprehension, and my brain does all kind of crazy stuff when I try to read. And so
Mhm.
they start trying to influence me by giving me all of these great things that I
Mhm.
can take away and go, okay, well, maybe I do need to start reading things that I like. But they're not sitting there going, no, you need to be a reader, Melissa. There is no other option. You know what I'm saying? So,
Right,
so
right,
they're
right.
not trying to
That's a
control
difference, yeah.
me. They're trying
Mhm.
to influence
Influence.
me. And what
That's
you
good.
find in a lot of relationships, particularly romantic relationships, is people are trying to control each other.
Yeah.
And we could probably get into it. I hate to go there, but I'm gonna talk about the church because I like to talk about the church. But this whole thing about submission.
Mhm.
What really is submission? And certainly it should not look like control. And so we
Right.
have to be mindful of how we're doing relationships where we're just communicating to another person that they have to do it the way we tell them or the way we think they should do it. And it's all about me valuing my own boundaries and
Mhm.
not valuing another person's boundaries. So
Mhm.
you have to respect other people's boundaries the same way you want people to respect yours.
Now, here's the thing about the submission, and I know the text you're talking about where it talks about wives submit yourselves unto your own husband. It was a gentleman who, when I was in our years ago, he was in our ministers and training class, and he did a lesson for one of his assignments. And I will, when I tell you, it left such an indelible mark. In it, he really broke down what it says, and it says, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. It says, wives, submit yourself unto your husband as unto the Lord.
Mhm.
If we're submitting to the Lord, he gets the benefit. The husband gets the benefit of our submission.
Mhm.
So though it if and I wish someone would have told me that years ago, because ultimately if how like how you're saying how it feels when someone is saying, especially when they're telling you you need to submit in that tone and in
Mhm.
how you're saying it and how you're delivering, because actually if the husband is aligned, because there's an alignment. Part of the
Yeah.
problem is that people, so here's the alignment, so here's Christ, here's the husband, here's the wife, right?
Mhm.
So you over here talking about I'm supposed to submit to you, but you over here you're not even submitting to Christ, right? Because that's
Mhm.
the order, right? And
Mhm.
so I'll never forget
That's
him
good.
explaining that. And the thing about it is that for a woman, if you're in a situation and I, I'm not telling you to be in a violent situation or whatever, but
Right.
I would think in my situation, had I had that type of understanding at the time, and when it says submit unto your husband as unto the Lord, I would have, I may have viewed it differently,
Mhm.
understanding that my submission is actually he's getting the benefit of me submitting to the Lord, because ultimately that's who my submission is to. Because
Mhm.
especially if he is aligning with, if he's following the Lord,
Right.
because Christ is the
That's
head,
where it starts. Mhm.
right? Because the man is supposed to be, he's supposed to be leading me based upon how God is leading him, right?
Correct.
That's
Mhm.
the order. And
Mhm.
so I think that with submission, I do understand how that impacts boundaries from a standpoint that oftentimes how we're using it.
Mhm.
And it sounds controlling.
Yeah.
But I think the biggest thing is that ultimately there was a gentleman who had this awesome video, and hopefully we'll share it on here one day. But it's an awesome video, and he was talking about so many people are out talking about submit, submit, submit. He says, have you given the woman to make to a safe space to feel like she would want to submit? And I
Mhm.
thought that was really powerful
Mhm.
because and that's even like with your children. You want your children to submit to you, what space are you creating for them to submit
Right.
to you?
Mhm.
So anyway, off of that,
No,
I think
I brought that up. I love
I mean,
going out to
I
church.
do have some things about boundaries, on align with, like, emotional boundaries from a biblical standpoint. Proverbs 4:23, it says, "Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it." I
Mhm.
thought that was really powerful because it does.
Mhm. Yep.
Um,
Yep.
let me see. The one I had, for sex really is the sexual boundary, and I'm just talking about from a standpoint from the confines of, not being married, and that's mainly that, um, when it says flee fornication, and it makes me think of it makes me think of Joseph
Mhm.
when, the man's wife was in pursuit of him, really just aggressively trying to get with him, and he was like,
Mhm.
"No, I can't do this." He
Mhm.
literally he fled. He literally she was in his boundary. She pulled his coat, he left it.
That's good. I like that.
She was right, so she was inside his hula hoop.
Yes,
And so
indeed.
he left her in the hula hoop.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
that was one of them. Time boundary, I did find where, oftentimes that the Lord, when he was going away after he had ministered to the people, he took time, where he stepped away and, he would go and he would pray. And so I think oftentimes we don't do well with time boundaries. So I know, we're getting close to the end, but I wanted to ask you, could you, like give us like what should we look for if we have healthy boundaries or unhealthy boundaries in these areas, or how should we work? Like what should we do?
So that's a great question. One of the things is to really pay attention to how you feel.
Mm.
Because most often than not, if there is a boundary violation, there's going to be some emotions. There's going to be burnout.
Mm.
So you're going to feel really exhausted,
Wow.
and burnt out by the relationship.
Mm.
And you hear, I mean, I hear a lot of people say relationship burnout. And it's
Mm.
a thing. It's a thing.
Mhm.
And how does a relationship burn out? It may quite possibly be that there's some boundaries that need to be put in place,
Mm.
or better boundaries.
Better
And we
bound
have to continually evaluate that, right?
That's
Every
good.
single day, you should be evaluating the boundaries that you have in your relationships, in your close relationships, just kind of doing an inventory. The Bible is a self assessment.
Come on now.
And the same way that we have to assess ourselves spiritually, we do have to assess ourselves relationally.
Mhm.
Even looking at, are you maybe overstepping some people's boundaries or
That's
violating
good.
some people's boundaries? Are you expecting things from people? I love listening to A.R. Bernard. And one of the things that he says is that disappointment doesn't come out of what you expected. Or not. What he says, disappointments come out of what you expected to find,
Mm.
not what you didn't find, what you expected to find. And so he talks a lot about, and I've heard you say this many times, manage your expectations.
Mhm. Mhm.
So we have to check in with our feelings, because your feelings serve a function. Okay.
That's
All
good.
feelings serve a function. So if you feel burnout, that means that there's some exhaustion going on. If you
Mhm.
feel resentment, there's some indignation and feelings of being mistreated. If you feel
Mhm.
frustrated, you might most likely be annoyed by something that another person is doing. If you feel angry, that usually means that something isn't fair, or you feel taken advantage of. If you
Mm.
feel, there are people out there that have this superhero syndrome that they call it, where they're trying to save everybody and help everybody at their
Mhm.
own demise.
Yeah.
If you feel some anxiety, it may be some people pleasing going on. There may be some fear that
Mm.
you have of implementing a boundary. And then depression usually is an indication that there's some hopelessness, that maybe you're afraid to lose this person,
Mm.
right? And sometimes, and again, I mentioned earlier abandonment and rejection. Nobody wants to feel abandonment and rejection.
Right.
And so setting healthy boundaries for a lot of people can create guilt. It can
Mm.
just cause people to feel a lot of guilt.
Mhm.
And guilt is not a bad thing. It
Mhm.
just means that you're aware that there's something that you could possibly do that could affect another person.
Right.
Okay. And so, but you have to find a way around that. You have to find a way to set healthy boundaries. So here's some great ideas that I came across. First, we have to identify the emotion. What is the area that we're experiencing where we may be exhausted or resentful? Because if those emotions are coming up, there is a need for a boundary.
Mm.
Define what you want that boundary to be. So, in other words, what do you not want to hear, see, or do?
Mhm.
What is something you don't want in
Right.
that particular relationship? Because we're always quick to talk about what we do
We
want.
go on. That is true.
I want you to look in my eyes and tell me how many times I'm beautiful. And and listen, all of that is wonderful. You should know what you want, but you should
Right.
also know what you don't want. So we
That's
want to have a
good.
balanced approach. And if
Mhm.
more people approach relationships thinking about all the things they didn't want, right? Because people know how to show up on a
That's
first
true.
date or in
Mhm.
a first encounter. They know how to show up. Most people are smart enough to know how to show up when you're first interacting with them.
That's true.
So we want to think about what we don't want. Go with, trust your gut reaction. If something is not sitting well, probably it's because it's not. And how
Mm.
many times I was talking to a lady about this earlier this week because she's been dating. And she was sharing with me that this particular person has been talking a lot about their ex. And I
Mm.
said, well, that's probably not the best conversation to have with somebody that you're dating. And we kind of processed through it. And she came to some awareness that, yeah, it doesn't feel like this person is really trying to get to know me. And I was like,
Mm.
yeah, because if they're still talking about their ex, that's
Mhm.
not what you do on a first date or
No.
or even on the second or third or fourth or fifth date. Like this person may need to go back and process some other things and then come back to the dating world.
Could you stop
Um,
talking about me? Because I think I've done that before back in the day.
I'm just gonna drop the mic. Can I just drop the mic?
I think no, I mean, I think I can reflect back. I think I've done that before. Oh my gosh. Deliverance. God is good.
These are great conversations that we can
Yes.
all benefit. Be willing to say no, and like I
Mhm.
said, it's going to bring up some guilt.
Right.
But one of the best things that you can do is sit with an emotion. You don't have to fix it.
Mm.
You don't have to change it. Just sit with it. And by the time you get to the end of sitting with that emotion, you may realize that it's not as bad as it may seem like it. Guilt is not all that bad when you're making a decision for your own well being. And
Mhm.
so just sit with that. It's always important to be assertive.
Mm.
And if you're recognizing that that person that you've set a boundary with is lashing out or they're unwilling to accept it, then
Mhm.
most likely the boundary was needed, right? Because when we
Wow.
when we're in genuine, loving, uh, reciprocal relationships,
Mhm.
most people are going to support us in setting healthy boundaries, right? They're going to
Good.
be like, "Oh, girl, I'm glad you told me that I was violating your time. What can we do?" You see what I'm saying? They're going to
Mhm.
have a completely different reaction if they're in
Mhm.
support of you implementing healthy boundaries. But if
That's
they're
good.
lashing out and they're getting offended, then chances are the boundary was desperately needed. Know what you want your consequences to be. I've had to block people's phone numbers.
Mhm.
um, Discontinue a lot of communication with that person in contact. So you have to think about what those
Mhm.
consequences are going to be, and you have to be willing to live with them.
Mhm.
It may mean the dissolution of the relationship. And,
Mhm.
if that person is at that place, going back to what you said, if reconciliation is not possible, then okay. But I still have to make sure that I am having relationships with people that are safe.
Safe. That's I was just
Ultimately,
gonna say, that's
ultimately,
ultimately, if that's what is
that's the goal.
that's the goal, to have
And
safe relationships, and I really like how you said that if that's what they're showing, then the boundary was needed and probably was
correct.
needed quite a long time, and the issue that they're having is that how dare you put a boundary because I
Exactly.
liked the access that I had.
Mhm.
That's
Mhm.
real good. That's real good.
Yeah, because we can very easily get into enabling behavior.
That's
So
a whole
any
that's a whole we gonna have
that's a whole other topic, but yeah,
to
where you're enabling bad behavior,
That's true.
or you are holding people accountable. Now, sometimes people come back and they go, like I said, they go, "Oh my goodness, I didn't even realize I was doing that. I'm so glad you brought that to my attention," and they
Right.
change.
Mhm. That's a good thing. That's a good
And then the last but not least, reach out to people for support.
mm,
There are people out here who know how to set good boundaries. There are therapists, mentors, a lot of people who can tell you, what's your secret to having a safe relationships, and they do it, and they do it pretty well. So
mm. Oh, that's good. This is really good. I mean, definitely gave me food for thought. For real.
you was sitting up here tell me I'm talking about you.
Listen,
I was
Lord
talking.
Jesus,
Listen, I'm talking about me too. But
this
I
is good.
mean, it is. It's really good stuff. And
This is
I mean, there we have so many examples in our world. We have
mhm,
so many examples in the church. We have so many examples in our families,
mhm,
of people that don't have safe relationships,
right.
and it can be very, very damaging. And
Yeah.
so I appreciate the opportunity to bring awareness to this,
Mhm,
because we need it.
right.
You and I had a conversation when I was in Ohio, about, what is appropriate physical things to do with people in church,
Right.
right?
Mhm,
We love
mhm.
to quote that
Hug
scripture,
people.
give you a brotherly kiss, or what is it? What's the word? What does it say in the Bible? A brotherly kiss or something? I
Everybody
mean,
shouldn't be kissing, but
but but
okay.
but you have to take into consideration what's safe, and so I want
Right.
that to be like the foundational piece of
Mhm.
healthy boundaries is, are you having relationships that are safe? And if you're not, then there is some boundaries that are being violated.
I bet you and you can actually we can do the work to actually put them in place so that we can have safe relationships, because that's the
Correct.
ultimate goal.
Correct.
I know you have a good one for us, so I'm excited. I think the nugget I just want to share is that
Yes.
definitely take some time to evaluate, your boundaries, and if you need to put some boundaries in place for some people, for yourself.
Mhm.
Um and if you got a journal, to help you figure it out. She mentioned Melissa mentioned if you have resentment, if you're angry, a few other things that she mentioned. Think about those things and think is some of this have to do with that maybe some of your boundaries are being blown through. Um
Mhm.
so I definitely want to encourage
I like how
encourage
you said that, blown through.
just blown through.
Yes.
No guardrails, just blown through. But,
Right.
this was really good for me. And before Melissa does her good one, I do wanna say that we are excited. One of the boundaries that she had mentioned was about emotional boundary and
Mhm.
talking about, being safe in spaces where you have interactions and experiences with individuals and being vulnerable. So I'm excited to say that in honor of Father's Day week, we are going to have some awesome men come on here and talk about real men and the vulnerable being vulnerable,
Mhm.
especially in today's society. And the great thing about it is we're going to have someone from each. We're going to have a Gen X. We're going to have a couple millennials, and we even managed to get a Gen Z. So we're
Woo!
very, very excited. So look for it. The week of Father's Day, real men dealing with vulnerability. And so we're pretty excited about that. And that has
Very
to do
excited.
have some boundary things too. So we're pretty
Mhm.
excited about that. And so with that, I'm going to hand over to Melissa for our good one. Good one, go do.
Yes. All right. Well, I'm a writer, so I had to write something. So here it is. Relationships should always feel safe for us to thrive. From the moment we are born, we are looking to others to help us identify and understand what is safe. We must never normalize toxic or abusive behaviors because they only indicate that boundaries have been violated and will only lead to feelings of insecurity and instability. To ensure that we are safe, we must be willing and courageous enough to make sure we are experiencing something valuable in the relationship. Seek reciprocity and you will find genuine and lasting connections.
Beautiful. Good one. Go do. That was really, really
Yay!
good, Melissa. Thank you so much. Thank you,
Thank
everyone, for
you.
hanging out with us. We appreciate
Yes.
you.
We're so glad to have you here. We are Righteous Minds, where we are tending the mind and nurturing the soul. We hope that your soul was nurtured today. We're so grateful to have had this conversation, and we look forward to seeing you again. Please go to our subscribe. Is that what I'm supposed to say? Subscribe to our podcast. We would love to have you guys become active listeners and viewers. We appreciate that. So please subscribe to Righteous Minds. We can be found on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram. Anything I'm missing?
TikTok.
TikTok. All right. Well, thank you all so much. Thank
Take
you. Have a good
care.
one. Bye bye.
Bye.